Welcome to How It All Started podcast in North Iowa. My name is Erick Nganyange. I'm your host, and my guest today is Terry Harrison. Terry, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
How long did you work for the library?
26 years. As a historian and the archivist. I was in charge of the archives.
Do you guys collect the information for the town and kind of preserve them?
Yeah. The proper term is we received the material, not collected it.
Okay. So people just bring it in?
Not just bring it in. They ask us if we want it, and then we receive it if we want to.
Oh, okay.
So, we took it if we wanted. There were a lot of times people had stuff, and I said, it hasn't any real pertinence to Mason City, or the people that live there, so therefore we didn't take it. That aggravated some people at times. It annoyed them because it'd say, well, why isn't such and such a here? And I said, because it isn't relevant to Mason City at all, or even to the county. That's something that we had to get people accustomed to.
Mason City, Masonville, Mason City, Shibboleth, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So Mason City was basically born in 1853?
That was when it was founded. The county, James Wright, I think he was, and a few others were deer hunters and stuff came through, and were the first people to actually come through the county and look it over. But they were all out of Illinois. A lot of them, like John Long, John McMillan, they were all from around the same areas of Illinois. Came in, they found out Cerro Gordo County was open. Nobody here really. Well, there were a lot of Indians here, but no Euro-Americans here. So they came in and made their settlements.
So were they going somewhere else and they just stumbled this area?
John McMillan was born in New York. A lot of the people were born in New York. And then they kept moving into Ohio, and then they just kept moving west. And they were in western Illinois. And they heard about, like I said, there were the immigrant guides and stuff like that. Yeah. And there was virtually free land if you wanted it, for $1 an acre or something like that. And so they moved into this area, and they deliberately came here. Yeah, oh, wow. It was a deliberate thing to move to to move to Cerro Gordo County. And the confluence, I think probably they realized the Winnebago River and the Willow Creek confluence caused them to decide this was a good place to settle. Yeah. And then Clear Lake over on the other side. West of us here, 8 miles, there was a group that settled in there at the same time. There are several things. I don't know if you've seen a copy of if you go in the library, you can ask Katrina or Katie, or go into the archives and see if you can get a copy of we called it John Long's grocery store or general store. It may have been McMillan's. There was no way of knowing. It's a grocery store, handwritten ledger, grocery ledger. And, of what people were buying and what they were trading. I mean, boy, a lot of trading going on. A guy would, he would trade a couple deer carcasses. In the wintertime especially, they'd hang some deer, and in return they'd get, stuff for that, flour or something like that. And so there was a large amount of barter going on. But that was normal. If you look through the books, you'll find out as you read through it, they're trading or they're selling something, and they're accepting guineas, English money, Spanish money, stuff like that. Because west of the Mississippi, there was not a lot of currency. It just simply wasn't there. And the specie wasn't there. So people traded and bartered. And they used a lot of Spanish and English and French money. So that ledger begins in 1856, I think, or 55, winter of 55. That's what we think it might be Long's instead of McMillan's. McMillan had the first general store. Yeah. But we think John Long had one later, and we think this might have been his. And the other key to it was that we know that his business failed in 1857. But then that was the Panic of 57. They didn't call them depressions or recessions. They called them panics. And so...
that's what they mean.
That's what they mean.
Oh, okay.
The Panic of 57 was created by a ship full of gold gold bullion, basically, coming around from San Francisco in 1857, came around South America, came up, and sunk off the South Carolina coast in a storm. And it was a huge amount of bullion. And it was insured by an Ohio, I can't remember which Ohio insurance company insured it. It bankrupted that company. And the ripple effect was that it bankrupted, it just created problems all over the United States.
Oh,
and
wow.
including in places like Mason City and small stores like
John
Long's and stuff. Maybe that's it. They could no longer afford to keep stuff open. No, it's quite a situation,
Wow.
But if somebody had tied up their investments, they had to buy stuff from wholesalers someplace, and if you got in over your head on that, then you ran over your head. If you couldn't pay for it, then it went.
So these two men, should we say they were the first one here, John McMillan and John Long?
John McMillan and John Long. James Jenkinson.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
Jamie Jenkinson, as if you go out to the Elmwood Cemetery, he's got one of the more elaborate tombstones because he was a stonemason, and I guess he built his own tombstone. And he was an English immigrant. He came to the United States with his sister, if I recall correctly, and I think she stayed in Ohio or Illinois or someplace. But James Jenkinson followed. He came with McMillan.
So these three founders, James Jenkinson,
John Long and George Brentner was the other.
George
Brentner was the one who named it Shibboleth. And his area was actually what we think of the center part of the town. He settled down on basically the intersection of state and federal.
So he's the one who named the town for the first time, Shibboleth.
He named it Shibboleth, but rather he named it that. Well, he had that, and at the same time, John Long had Masonic Grove over off of the 12th Street Bridge, and where there was a mill over there on the side. So nobody was writing down who was first. Eventually, Long acquired both areas, and he's the one who finally settled on Mason City. His story, now, there's a mixture of notions about that, too. Now, there is about John Long. One story says that he named it after his son Mason Long, who died before he, could make it to Mason City or make it to Iowa, who died over in Illinois before they moved. So I don't know, that one. There's several others, so it may have been named after him. Other people, 1883, I think, has several different versions. They refer to John Long as a snide of the Masonic order, which means he was not well accepted in it, that he was kind of halfway, not a real good member of the Masons. Who knows? But everybody prefers to just think that it was because of the Masons.
And that's what I read. That's what
you're going to read most of the time, and that's a popular notion. But I've always been questioning about whether that was it, or did he just name it after his son?
So they went from Shibboleth, Masonic Grove,
Shibboleth, and finally to Mason City.
Then Masonville,
and then
Mason
City. Yeah, so it had three names before it became Mason City.
Is there any descendant of all these four founders of Mason City still in this town?
The Bowen family, Mike and Katrina Bowen, who's at the library. That's her great grandfather. Who's Brentner? George.
Oh, really?
Was, yeah.
Oh gosh, I did not know that. Okay, now I'm going to talk to Katrina. Yeah, because she told me one time, she's like, "Oh yeah, my family has been in Mason City forever."
They have been.
Okay. Yeah. Oh wow. Anybody else? That's all we got.
There used to be. But I think I'm trying to think now. I think that's the only one I can remember now. But she's probably the most prominent on that. John Long finally probably left after the Civil War. So.
Okay. Did James ended up going to Clear Lake? James Jenkinson?
No, he stayed here in town. As a matter of fact, I wish that I'd have photographed or done something to get a picture of it. The house that he lived in until 19 10 or whenever he died, was up around where the new Fairway is on the curve there. He had a house up there, and he lived there until he died.
When is the name Cerro Gordo County came into play?
It was named that after the state. The state put them in after the War of 1846, after the Mexican-American War. There were 3 battles that they named counties in: Cerro Gordo, Palo Alto, and Buena Vista.
Oh, really? And those are all
those are battles during the war.
Oh,
in
really?
Mexico. Buena Vista, Battle of Buena Vista was fought. Cerro Gordo means like Fat Hill. The brewery's named Fat Hill. Roughly, it can be translated into all sorts of things. Cerro Gordo means fat or big, and a cerro is a pass or a hill.
Here's another thing I read, and I don't know if it's true or not. It said the settlers did not move in here until after the Indian vacated the land.
Oh, no, they were, even on the histories, you talk about the Winnebago, there were Indians that moved, back and forth through here all the time. There was an area called the Neutral Zone, established from about Fort Atkinson over east of here to a little past Cerro Gordo, I guess. It was an area that the Indians could hunt in and stuff, but the dragoons out of Fort Atkinson patrolled it and made sure they didn't get into fights.
Oh, yeah.
Because there were Dakotas and Winnebagos and Iowa Indians. There were just an assortment of Indians that were living in Iowa.
Yeah, because I was wondering if there was any type of conflict.
The only conflict was you'll find the Grindstone War written up, and that was where some Dakota Indians got in here, or Lakotas, I guess they were. But anyway, they got in, and they were rousting about, and they would go in apparently and try to intimidate the settlers, but they weren't dangerous. They weren't going to murder anybody or kill anybody.
Oh, okay.
And so they were, they just were looking for whatever. I mean, it was their property. I mean, really, they were thrown off. Mm-hmm. And later on, you've got the Spirit Lake Massacre. Have you read about it? Okay.
Because that's the one in Okoboji, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Spirit Lake, Okoboji.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the families that lived here, what is his name? They're mentioned in that ledger that I was telling you about. Yeah.
Oh, John Long ledger?
Yeah. They would go from over by Clear Lake, wherever they lived, and then come in, and they would use Long's store to trade and buy things. We know that they bought some ribbon and some other things, so maybe to decorate a hat with or something.
Oh, wow.
Some other stuff. About 6 months before they moved over to Okoboji, Spirit Lake, and
then the massacre happened.
Yeah.
So the first store ever being built is John McMillan. He was the first.
And there's one photo that I know of that is apparently situated on Main Street. You can also look, pretty sure the city map from 1880s is still, it was 1895 map, still shows that location. But there are several things like that, hand-drawn maps and stuff like that.
Because I saw it say that that's the first store he had. It was 1858.
Yeah,
and which
58 or 55.
Yeah, which it kind of makes sense if he.
I think it was 55 because he was. Yeah.
Oh yeah, because if he came in 1853.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he started his store right after that, and he was downtown. What would be on, I think, First Street and like First and Federal or something.
Okay.
East side of First and Federal or something.
Yeah. And then did he build like a log house? Like right on the Federal?
He built the house and everything and lived upstairs, and the store was
downstairs.
That was normal.
Interesting.
Oh, it is. It's real entertaining, that early history of stuff.
Is it true that George Brentner and John B. Long were responsible in building the Central Park?
Yeah. They deeded it. George Brentner, if I recall, George Brentner deeded it to the people of Mason City
Okay.
as a land space. There's always been a thing saying that you couldn't build anything on Central Park because the original deed said you couldn't build anything on Central Park, whatever. Well, there's 1870s postcards and 1880s postcards that show billboards and everything else on Central Park.
Yeah.
So that was just, it was just traditionally they haven't put anything on there.
Did they also build the courthouse?
Well, the original courthouse was to the west, and what is it now? The bank over there is Wells Fargo Bank or whatever. That was an area where there were theaters. There was an old building there, stone building, and that was the original courthouse. And then the courthouse was in 1901. They built a big stone into the north side facing the park. And it was a big stone, very attractive building, But in 1959, they decided the building was decrepit and whatever. And Standard Oil of India, where the courthouse is now.
Yeah.
Well, that was built by Standard Oil of Indiana because they had a office there. East side of the building, you'll notice how much different it is from the rest of the building. You can immediately see. Standard Oil had the original building. They decided to move out, and the city needed a building, so that's why they put the courthouse there.
What year was the Central Park put together?
About 1853.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was really early on.
Oh, wow. Wow. On the sad news, can we talk about winter of 1856 and 57? I read that.
I think I can vaguely remember that. Yeah, that's where it was
it was worse. Was
it a late spring or an early fall, late fall maybe, where it was the winter time, and it started out a nice day, and before the day had ended up, a storm came through, and I don't remember how many feet of snow.
9 feet of drift.
Yeah, and just killed the horses,
22 people were frozen to death in Sarasota County.
Yeah.
Gosh. Ooh.
And you didn't, it all happened so rapidly they couldn't get under shelter and they died. Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. That's the worst one in history?
Worst winter in history?
Yeah.
Worst one of the number of people being killed, but there were other storms. If you look through the photos at the library, I think it was the winter of 1936 that they had so much snow. It drifted up as high as the top of the telephone poles, the drifts were.
Oh, really?
And there's photos in the thing of guys and walls of snow on either side, and the telephone poles, just the very top of it showing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that was some snow.
Yeah, and this at this time people. But now if there's
that
a telephone pole,
was the 1920s. Or 1930s, and so people got inside their places, and I don't know if anybody.
They're not living in a cabin anymore.
No, I don't think anybody died from that one, but they really had fun taking pictures of it and hanging out on it and sitting up there on them and everything else. They did it all.
1855. Establishing the post office?
Probably. The first post office they'd have been getting mail here in 1853, 54, because you had a regular,
How they do that without a post office?
They were coming out of probably Waterloo, I think. And you would send a wagon up here, and if you were getting a letter or something, you'd get it by whenever it got here, whoever was traveling through. Remember, there was quite a bit of traffic between here of the two general stores and then other people traveling back and forth. And probably they had an agreement here locally. They probably said, check with the post office in Waterloo or whatever to see if you're going to be down there, see if I've got anything. They put them as general delivery. And so they would have them divided up, general delivery, as I imagine what they called it in those days. And, they would have boxes full of mail for these people, and they would just say, here, take this to Mason City.
Now, this is the way I'm imagining this, because 1854, 53, 55. people living in a cabin.
No.
Where's the mail delivered to the
It
store?
would be delivered to probably one of the general stores, and
Oh.
you'd check into one of those and say, like I said, the general stores were
Was everything.
Yeah. By 1858, they had the stone school building built. And that was not only a school building, but it also worked as general purpose meeting hall. But I think that you could probably, it was probably more likely that they were still probably getting their mail at the grocery, the general store, going there. There'd be word put out by mouth, tell
The mail is
so
here.
we got a letter for them or something. That's well, it was the way things were, That's
Yeah.
how you did it. I mean,
I'm imagining the store like that, like Macmillan, or it was almost like a coffee shop, hanging out spot.
it was. Yeah, if you read the things, that's what they did. They sold everything there. I mean, long store. If you read through that ledger at the library, you've got whiskey, quinine, laudanum. They had all of that. Like I said, the whiskey, everything. They sold at the grocery store. At the general store, sold everything. There weren't any saloons built until 1860 or so. They started building the saloons. I think the first one was in. Like I say, Long Store, Macmillan's store, both sold whiskey. They sold whatever. They just weren't selling beer a lot because you couldn't keep it, But later on, as soon as they were able to get a place in where they could keep the beer, they sold beer. They sold everything until the state, until the county passed a prohibition in 1884 finally and knocked out. We had 2 breweries in town. Have you seen?
Oh.
There's the remains of the old brewery are up in Lime Creek. The brewery trail. There's a cave up there.
Yeah.
That was a brewery.
Oh, really?
And then there's down where, right across from East Park, on the west side, there's a house there now. There's a brick old church. The old Union Memorial Methodist Church was there. Behind that that's about where the brewery was. There was a brewery
I know the
there.
one at Lime Creek.
Yeah, well, there was one there too.
Okay.
And so they had breweries and stuff here by 1880s, but they closed them both down. I think those breweries were started in the 1870s, at least 1860s or 70s.
Oh, wow.
So people had lots of
Fun.
lots of beer, lots of whiskey, lots of laudanum. They had all kinds of stuff to.
I mean, what else
perk
to
them
do
so-
back then?
That's right.
Yeah.
They just
Yeah. Oh, man.
I told people there's some photos in the library that show the streets in 1870 something and 1880s, and they're dirt streets with water sitting and pooled. It's quite interesting. Pictures.
Oh, wow.
There were stereo cards. It's interesting. We used to study them all the time. People would say, "What do we do at the archives?" I said, "Well, we research stuff," but I said a lot of our time is spent when you walk in there and see us just staring at computer screens or staring at pictures. We would scan an image in at a high level and then stare at it
Oh, wow.
and look and see what's in that.
Yeah.
And I came up with all kinds of really interesting stuff.
This is another thing I found out. The early community had 4 churches and school.
Okay.
And correct me on this if I'm wrong. The first church was formed March 8, 1857. It was Methodist Church. And then next year was Congregational Church, 1858. And then the third was St. Joseph, the Catholic Church. And then Baptist Church was organized 1866. Talk about that. Is that stone old school?
The old stone
The
school.
old school, yeah.
It was approximately where that big Methodist church is down by the library. I wondered because it said it was moved in 1880 something. But I always thought that was interesting that said they moved it because it was a substantial stone school. Even the photographs show it. It was still there in 1880s. Aerial photo that was taken from the peak of what was the Central School.
Okay.
Central School burned in 1926, but it was there for about 40 years. It was built, but the stone school was still there when it was built. And then I'm trying to get it, but there is a newspaper article that said the stone school was moved by so-and-so to whatever. So, parts of that may
They moved the whole thing?
Yeah, they just picked it up and moved. People move stuff all the time. It was more than tearing them down. If a house was in the way, you just picked it up and moved it. They had mules and they had jacks, and they would lift the thing up, slide something under it, and haul it away.
Oh, so I'm guessing when they were building with that in mind. That we might ended up moving.
Maybe not. They just built pretty well, probably. They just built substantially enough that they could move it. People built buildings in those days expecting them to last for as long as they needed them. Last for a long time.
What's the difference? Why is that?
Mindset.
Is it?
Yeah. Americans like to tear things down. They'd rather tear it down than fix it up.
Yeah. Talking about school, I did not know this also, that Kat Chapman was...
She taught at the Central School.
At the Central School?
That big Central School.
Was she from Mason City or she moved here?
She was from Charles City area. Actually, she was born in Wisconsin, but her family moved to Charles City, and where the family home, and where she grew up.
Okay.
But she's an interesting person, and her time in Mason City is very interesting. She and her first husband was Leo Chapman, and he ran a local newspaper here, and they got into the fight with a guy named Henry Shepard, who ran a paint and whatever store, but he was also a local Republican leader, They accused him of all sorts of things. He was a county official. They accused him of basically ripping off the county for funding, and stuff. And of course, he couldn't let that happen, so he got up in the air and he charged them with libel. So when Carrie Chapman and her husband Leo left, well, he left and got sick in San Francisco and died before she could get to him. But they had sold their newspaper by then, and they were leaving because they did not leave well here. Later on, when she became famous and everything was there were certain people here that welcomed her back and said, we'll just bygones be bygones. We didn't really mean all those things we said about you and everything.
You're famous now.
Yeah, you're famous now, and we're going to leave it. Well, she married Leo Chapman, and then he died out in San Francisco. She, meanwhile, kept working on different things, and then she found George Catt. George Catt and she had gone to college down at Iowa State.
Iowa State. Yeah.
And they got back together again and got married. And he was a successful engineer, if I recall correctly, and he was successful at stuff. So he was able to provide her with the income she needed to work on these other things, work on women's suffrage and stuff, and he was willing to let her do it. The first entry we have of her is in the earliest city directory that's in the library, and she's listed as Carrie Lane. Then she marries Leo Chapman. Before she married him and stuff, she was doing a column called Woman's World, and it was really an interesting column. It's a very, very important column and a piece of work. It's really good. And it deals with what women have to do in order to survive in this world, And so that was when she was still living here. When she married Leo Chapman, she gave up teaching because you couldn't be married and be a teacher unless you were a male. Women couldn't be married teachers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you couldn't do that. And so, but she didn't want to teach anymore anyway, probably. She was mainly interested in all this. And then a few years later when he died, and then I think she married George Catt about 5-6 years later.
Oh, so Chapman and Catt, those are two.
That's her. She was Carrie Lane when she got married. She was Carrie Chapman, and then she was George Catt's wife, so she just adopted.
Both.
She just
Oh,
kept
okay.
her Chapman cat. She stayed Chapman cat because Leo had done. I think Leo had done so much for her, and they were so compatible and everything. It was just they got along. But boy, there are things in her past that once again, I've had people. I've read things to them. I've pointed out stuff to them. And they've said, "Oh my God, this is racist speech and everything else." And I said, "Yeah, but that's the way people thought in the 19th century. That's exactly how they talked about one another. They would be very patronizing to the black guy down the street. There were only 3 black people in the whole town. Watson, who was a barber here, and he, they liked him because he sponsored a baseball team, a serious baseball team, things like that." And he voted and he sat on juries and stuff. So it was they treated him pretty equally. But at the same time, in their general speech patterns and stuff, that isn't.
That didn't change. That did not change.
The N word was common, published in the papers and everything. She was part of that society. She's part of that upper middle class, kind of upper intellectual, and educationally, she was part of the upper elite here. And so that's how they thought, and that's what they did.
I want to go back on the Civil War a little bit. 125 men from Mason City
About that,
ended up, and 24 did not come back.
Yeah, and that was Company B, I think. Yeah.
All their names at the Central Park?
Yeah, I
Or
think
just
so. No,
the fallen one?
The fallen ones, and then if you go to the library, you can get 32nd. We did a write-up years ago. Katrina's father did a whole thing on the 32nd Infantry.
Oh, wow.
Did an entire thing on it and all the stuff on it. It's fascinating. And there are relatives of those guys still in town. I know.
Oh, really?
Bob Lawrence it was his great-grandfather.
Okay, because I think they said H.I. Smith was the first one to
H.I.
enlist.
Smith was the one. I think he formed the thing, got a Medal of Honor, know, and everything.
Yeah.
Congressional Medal of Honor, but he was, in those days, they kind of gave him away. They didn't have any other medals, so they gave you a Medal of Honor.
McNider, did he own one of the bank here in town?
C.H. McNider, and he shows up prominently. He shows up prominently in the 1880s in that argument with Catt. But where City Center is now, okay, the big bank there, formerly the First National Bank, that was McNider's bank, and the Northwest States Portland Cement Company that is now closed. That was C.H. McNider, took over eventually. He took that over for all intents and purposes. He was on the board and took it over. The First National Bank, once again, he managed to work his way into the top, and finally he
started
was a
as
janitor.
janitor.
Yeah. Remember, there were only 150 people here probably at the time, 200 people in town. And if you were smart enough to get to be a janitor, and if you could do it and push a broom, there you go.
Yeah. So the first bank was established 1869, Sarasota County Bank.
Yeah.
By
Lytle, I think, Lytle.
Talking about bank, the infamous John Dillinger, 1934. How did he end up in Mason City? Because I did not know he stole that much money. 52,000?
1,000.
And and I looked, that equivalent to like 1 million today.
Yeah. They came to Mason City because they were essentially out of Chicago. They were Midwest bank robbers. And
so that's what he was doing for a living.
Well, yeah, that's what he did for a living. He's a bank robber. He didn't have a job. Well, he had a job.
He had a job.
He had to rob banks.
Yeah.
He and John Hamilton and Red Hamilton, he's also known, and Babyface Nelson, all of them, they did this for a living. That was what they did. They came here because they knew that there was the 2 cement plants and the brick and tile plants and everything, and they knew there was a lot of cash going in and out of that bank, that it would be full. All you had to do is read the newspapers and stuff once a year or so, and it'd tell you what the assets were, the different banks. And it was easy enough to find them. And so
really?
They could go in and, yeah.
Oh, so they were putting that information on the newspaper?
Sure. It's public newspapers. I mean, you had to do that. I mean.
Was that the biggest amount he pulled? Is that why he's so famous?
No,
here in
there
town?
was I think the Sioux City bank robbery about a week before that was 57,000. And then they got the 52,000 here, and they hit another one that I think was 48,000 or something. Yeah, these guys are raking in some money. And you'd have thought they'd have been able to do something about that and save it and cut loose. And no, they don't. It was too easy to knock off a bank. And yeah, it was their lifestyle. They were having a good time.
And they usually get thrill on robbing the bank. They really don't even thinking about, oh, let's lay low. Because if they hit another bank a week before,
Yeah.
you cannot tell me you already spent 56 grand
Yeah.
next week.
That's right. I think it was either 57 or 54,000. It was more than they got here. Yeah, it was a well-planned robbery, but it was standard for them. They had the same. They had two people came in. I think we figured it was Eddie Green and.
Came in the bank.
Well, they came to town and cased the town so they could figure out where the exits were and everything else, how to leave town, and they hung ribbons on the posts and stuff that people wouldn't necessarily notice, but they were guideposts to tell the guys where to turn and everything.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they came in and did all that about a week ahead of time or 3 or 4 days ahead of time.
The real mastermind.
Uh-huh. And
gosh.
then they came back, the whole crowd did, shot up the bank with their Tommy guns and shot up the street and did all of that and then left.
And John Dillinger was the lead, was it?
Yeah, kind of a nominal leader. Those things were real loose, you know. Red Hamilton would come up with an idea. Whoever came up with the idea got to be the leader, I think, is what it was. But Dillinger, I think, was pretty much a leader. He was considered a leader. And, you know, Dillinger stood outside the bank and held off people, and Babyface Nelson on State Street was there. And then inside the bank, you had Eddie Green, and you wanted Green inside because a couple days before, at the same time they were casing everything, they went over to, not far from where I live, on North President. They knocked on a guy's door, and when he answered the door, they looked him over and said, "I think we got the wrong address." And he said, "Okay." He said, "Well, where is so-and-so?" And he pointed out to him, and he said, "Okay," and walked out. Well, they didn't have any interest in they didn't get the wrong address. They had the right address. They were looking at this guy. It was Fisher, I think it was. They wanted to make sure they had somebody who would have a key to the gates. During the day, the safe opened. They left it open, but there was a locked gate across the front of it so that people just couldn't walk in and get into it. And this guy was Fisher had a key. And they knew that. So they wanted to make sure they recognized him. So Green was inside with Hamilton and the others, and they took him inside so he could spot whoever it was.
Oh, so they're knocking on the door to make sure they just see his face.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah, that was it. These guys they were no slouches. They had this down. They weren't the smartest guys in some respects of the world, but they were smart enough to figure out how to pull a bank job and get all their ducks in a row. They needed to make sure they could see this guy's face. Like I say, they would go through and find out, like a city directory would tell them who the vice president, who the president, vice president, who the chief, what was he called, teller or whatever it was. This Fisher was one of the people they knew that if he was there, they could he'd have a key.
he got a key. Yeah, sorry, I think we got the wrong address.
Yeah, I think we got the wrong address. Thanks. And then they walk out and they go.
Because, so when they come back next day, they just know exactly who got the keys.
Yeah. And there's all kinds of stories. Some people say they stayed at a hotel in Manly for overnight. And I said, why would they do that? They could drive. They were living in St. Paul, I think is where they were. And it was, in those days, it would have been about a 3.5 hour drive. But they made it down. They had time. They could get up late and be here by 3:30. Some people say they stopped and got gasoline at the place that's right across from where Family Dollar is on North Federal. But that's silly. They wouldn't have done that. Why would they have done that? They would have made sure and they said that they got gasoline up there. Okay, that's fine. They may have done that, but they certainly didn't ask for the directions to the bank.
They had to know already.
They knew where the
they
bank
knew where
was.
they were going.
So they may have gotten gasoline there, but they didn't ask for directions to the bank. They left another car out at this gravel pit out here on the southeast part of town. They had this well planned out. And they shot the place up, took the hostages, and roared off into town.
They took the hostage with them?
Oh, they took hostages all the way to... They came out, the best that we figured out, went up to 2nd Street. They drove west on 2nd Street to Monroe down here, and then they cut out. Remember, the streets weren't, the highways weren't the same as they are designated now. The streets were all there, but there were different designations. So they ended up going out, I think, we figured out they went out Taft, whatever that was. That was kind of almost the city limits. And they headed out that way toward the old country club. And then they headed back east again. Meanwhile, they had these people hanging on the side of the cars and stuff like that. They went out and out and out, and then they found 50 highway or 65 highway again and went down to a little town called Hanford down the road here. And they stopped in there. They had dumped everybody there. That was the last stop. And they let them out there. And then they headed on over to Portland. You know where Portland is, the little place there. It's you go out California next to Nyack there. Go out there, go south, and you'll see railroad tracks, and you'll see a few things. You'll see some silos there and stuff like that. North Iowa Co-op is there, and you'll see all that stuff. And that was the town of Portland at the time. And just south of there was a gravel pit. Well, they had left their getaway car there, and two of the guys got in that, or however many of them went in there, and then they all left, and they were in St. Paul that night. They were back in St. Paul by the evening, by 10 o'clock at night or so.
With 52K.
Yeah. They went to St. Paul because, if I recall correctly, St. Paul wouldn't bother them if they didn't do any robberies. They had a deal with the sheriff. And all of them that just said, we're not going to bother these guys if they're not robbing banks in Minneapolis or St. Paul, then we're not gonna bother them.
That's a good deal.
Well, that was a good deal for them, sure.
Yeah,
that's how they did it too. And,
that's a good deal. I'll rob the banks in neighboring towns, but not going to do anything here.
That's right. I mean, after all, they were living there. They didn't want to do that. Prohibition was over with. They were having a raucous time. They were having a good time in those days.
Talking about crime, talk to me about the Powder Street. Why did they even call it Powder Street?
Some people would tell you it's because of all the gunfire and everything and gunpowder. There was a there was an ammunition, like a dynamite storage place at the end of Jackson Avenue. That's where they did it, because it was rock quarries, all the quarries and stuff, and there was a thing, and that's why it was called Powder Street. It had nothing to do with all the gunfire, but that was a really tough time. Immigrants coming in and just, it had to be rough.
Yeah, they say all crimes, you name it. It happened in that town.
If you look at the 1923 newspaper article at the library, and it will tell you, it's a huge spread. I think the headline is Mason City, Iowa, where souls are traded for booze, dope, and boy, there were two undercover cops came in and wandered around town for a couple of weeks. Yeah. And when it was over with, it was just, they had been from Jackson Avenue and Van Buren, that area, clear to the north end and everywhere in between. And we have a list, or Katrina did, we made a list of the people, or of the residences they would give us, and we spotted them on something so we could tell where they all were. And yeah, it's pretty amazing. But yeah, it was an ugly situation. That was in the early 1920s.
Yeah.
It was not pleasant.
Was there murders? Oh, just
Yeah, there were some murdered. Yeah, there were several of them. Famous murders where two guys got into it up at it must have been Northwestern cement plant. It was the first use of hound dogs to search for people. Now we call getting the dogs out to look for people. We do that. We use dogs to search and rescue. We use dogs for everything. But this is the first time this Cerro Gordo case was where they'd used a dog to try to track somebody. And they did track him to a certain extent and then gone. But they eventually got the guy. It was a big lawsuit. And you could cover that in that may have been as late as 40-something. But yeah, a guy blew another one up, I think, is what he did. He just blew him up. He had access to dynamite and stuff. But people were killing each other pretty regularly here, but it wasn't like we have now. Read that newspaper article. Okay. It's 1920. If you go in and ask Katrina about it, it's the one with the big headline, and just look. Actually, there's some like vertical files called Crime and whatever, and there may even be a 3-ring binder, but there's files called Crime and Law and Crime and whatever else.
The first hospital by the Story Sisters, they run that thing for 37 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it lasted for a long time. And then the Pest House, have you heard about it? Or the Quarantine Hospital was over by East Park. If you got measles or even smallpoxes, I think, not.
Did they also run that one?
No, there was another one run by another lady. I can't think of her name right now. Yeah, there were two different. There was Story Sisters Hospital, but then the quarantine place was, if you got measles or something like that was highly contagious, then you were either quarantined in your house, unable to go out or whatever, or they sent you to the Pest House, is what they called it, the North Iowa Quarantine or North Iowa Hospital, so until it was over with. Those are the two places. Then the Sisters of Mercy came and built
here. Yeah. Took over ever since.
Yeah.
That Grant School that was located, Old Shopko there, was built 1884?
Probably.
Okay.
That one, and then, I don't know, later in the 20s, in the teens and the 20s, they had Madison School, and the early Jefferson and the early Washington schools were all built too. At the turn of the century, when the cement plants got built, there was an automobile plant here.
Yeah,
Colby
I saw
Autos,
that.
Colby Automobile.
It didn't last that long.
No, it couldn't compete. They didn't have an assembly line, and the assembly lines weren't really established till about 1914. I think Henry Ford put his first one in. And then you couldn't really compete unless you had an assembly line.
What was the first newspaper in town?
Cerro Gordo Press.
Oh, Cerro Gordo
and
Press.
There's a copy of the original paper. It's 1857 or 58.
Oh, really?
The original copy.
Is that the library?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's leather bound, and you can look through it.
Okay. Well, thanks for your time. And anything else you want to add that I'm forgetting about Medicine City history?
No, you let me know if you want to do this again or something, or if you run into something, we'll do it again.
All right. Thanks, Terry.
Yeah.